Russia was supposed to crush Ukraine. Everything was in the country's favor. Hundreds of thousands more troops, so many tanks, armored vehicles, and artillery units that Ukraine wouldn't know what to hit. An air force with a large number of modern fighter jets, including some of the most advanced models in the world. Russia was supposed to bring all of this to bear to take Ukraine in weeks, if not days. But that didn't happen. Instead, Ukraine is crushing Russia. And it's doing it by rewriting the rules of warfare to show Russia how it's done in the modern age. Before we dig deeper into how, we take you to July 9, 2025. That's when the Kyiv Independent reported that Ukraine's 3rd Separate Assault Brigade had pulled off a world first, the capture of enemy soldiers using nothing but drones. During an operation in the Kharkiv Oblast, the 3rd Assault Brigade deployed drones to scan the surrounding area for signs of Russian soldiers. The drones found what they were looking for as they identified a small group of Russian troops hunkered down in a foxhole, hiding away from Ukraine's forces. In traditional warfare, Ukraine would have sent infantry to confront those Russian soldiers. A firefight would have ensued. Soldiers from both sides would have died. But the 3rd Assault Brigade took a different approach. Rather than any of its members going in to assault the Russian position, the brigade worked alongside first-person view or FPV drone pilots to launch a devastating unmanned attack. Aerial drones weren't the weapon of choice here. Instead, the 3rd Assault Brigade sent a ground-based kamikaze drone loaded with 3 powerful anti-tank mines toward the enemy position. That drone reached the hunkered-down Russians and exploded, creating a powerful explosion that rocked the concealed Russian troops to their collective core. What happened next is where the world first comes in. After the blast, the 3rd Assault Brigade and their FPV drone operators started working on loading another ground-based kamikaze drone with mines. But before that drone could be deployed, the Russian soldiers peeked their heads out of their hidey hole and held up a white post containing a simple message: "We want to surrender." Again, there was a chance for Ukraine's troops to take the traditional route by sending soldiers in to complete the capture. But why do that when the 3rd Assault Brigade had drones at the ready? In an interview with Politico, a member of that brigade who goes by the name of Major explained what happened next. "We flew up to them and signaled them to follow us. They understood everything right away. What followed was a small group of Russian soldiers having surrendered directly to Ukraine's drones, being marched into safe territory and taken into custody. Ukraine had proven that its drones could feasibly complete a dangerous job that it usually reserved for humans, and in doing so, it's accomplished a feat never before seen that now serves as a microcosm of how Ukraine has rewritten the rules of warfare right under Russia's nose." Drones have become the most important weapon in the Ukraine war. And these unmanned vehicles are causing major problems for Russia in a number of ways. It's thanks to drones that the Ukraine war is at a relative stalemate. This isn't to say that Russia isn't taking territory in Ukraine. It has been throughout the war, with Al Jazeera noting that it occupies about 20% of the country as of August 18th. That amounts to 44,600 square miles of the country, with the front line now stretching some 620 miles. That may sound like a lot until you put these numbers into context. The vast majority of this territory was captured when Russia launched its invasion, when Ukraine was less organized and didn't have the extensive support it now has from its Western allies. Since that initial territory grab, Russia has only managed to take 0.97% of Ukraine between November 12, 2022 and August 2025. We covered the details in another video, so check it out if you want to learn more about why this is such a terrible rate of progress by Russia. The simple fact here is that the rate of Russia's advance shouldn't be this slow, at least according to what we see on paper. Russia's military is stronger than Ukraine's in every traditional metric. The Council on Foreign Relations made this clear back in June when it offered a direct comparison of the two countries' militaries. Russia has 1.134 million active troops compared to Ukraine's 730,000, it said. Russia has almost triple the number of tanks, 6,215 artillery units compared to Ukraine's 1,877, around 5 times the surface-to-air missiles, and an air force that dwarfs Ukraine's to the point where it has almost 1,400 more combat aircraft. Frankly, the Ukraine war should have been a whitewash in Russia's favor, but it hasn't been, and it's all thanks to Ukraine's brilliant drone innovations. The rapid advancement and widespread use of inexpensive observation and strike drones in the air and on the ground have transformed warfare in Ukraine since 2022 and is one of the biggest reasons Ukraine has managed to bring its far larger adversary to a stalemate, Politico said on August 27th, and it's right on the money. Ukraine's focus on not only manufacturing as many drones as it possibly could, but refusing to rest on its laurels as it drives further innovation, has stopped Russia's once mighty military in its tracks. Putin's attritional tactics would have worked by now were it not for these drones. Instead, Ukraine's drones have made it so that Russia will capture Ukraine in 2256, suffering 101 million casualties in the process, according to former Forbes military writer David Axe. The transformation of the Ukraine war into one that is heavily drone-focused has also resulted in evolutions in what we see on the battlefield. Take the kill zones, for example. Today, Politico says soldiers on both sides of the conflict are in serious danger if they stray as far as 6 to 9 miles away from the main contact line. The reason is that Ukraine has created a terrifying spin on the trench warfare we saw during World War I. Trenches still exist in Ukraine. Both sides use them to attack and defend, but where the past would have seen the no man's land between those trenches being peppered with artillery fire, now these regions are constantly patrolled by drones. Agile, fast, and capable of chasing down and killing anybody that they find. These drones have made it incredibly difficult for Russia to pull off the large-scale ground assaults that the country traditionally favors. These new kill zones are getting deeper, The Economist reported on August 4th. The emergence of medium-range drones, which can travel much greater distances than the FPV drones that typically target these zones, ensure that. Now, Russia doesn't just have to worry about what lies ahead of its lines, it has to worry about Ukrainian drones in the rear, about being caught in pincers from which there is no escape. You can't go forward and you can't go back thanks to these medium-range drones, leaving the only choices being to die or surrender in the center. One of these drones, dubbed the Shirsh, can travel for up to 37 miles and costs just $8,000 to build, a pittance in modern military manufacturing that will make it easy for Ukraine to manufacture these medium-range drones in bulk. Some problems do emerge from this evolution of Ukraine's drone kill zone strategy. According to The Independent, the sheer number of FPV drones employed by both sides is making it nigh on impossible for medics to get to soldiers who are caught in kill zones. As Darina Boyko, who is an anesthesiologist with Ukraine's 108th Da Vinci Wolves Battalion, told the outlet, because of drones that can reach far, the danger is there for the wounded themselves and now for the crews working to get them out. That's why the main difficulty now is transport. These sorts of difficulties are sacrifices that Ukraine has had to make as it's evolved on the battlefield. The benefits of using drones to create kill zones, as well as building them in such great quantities, far outweigh the drawbacks of not being able to reach some injured soldiers. As tragic as these sorts of losses always are, they're all accounted for in the great calculator of war. Every battle that any country fights is a game of numbers, and Ukraine knows that it loses far fewer soldiers by employing its kill zones, even with the issues that medics now face, than it would if drones weren't on the battlefield. And drones have certainly become the leading killer in the Ukraine war. They account for between 60 and 70% of all casualties that take place in Ukraine, and both sides have been forced to adapt. One of the strangest and, again, innovative consequences of Ukraine's shift toward drones has been in the defenses that are popping up. Entire stretches of front-line streets are now draped in netting to shield against aerial attacks, Politico points out. The expansion of the drone kill zones has also forced Russia into a position where it can no longer launch the massive assaults it used to launch against Ukraine's fortifications. Access roads, which Russia may have previously used to send columns of mechanized units on the attack, are now patrolled by so many FPVs that they've become unusable. When Russia is foolhardy enough to send tanks and armored vehicles along these roads, it always does so knowing that the risk of kamikaze drones loaded with explosives that can take these vehicles out is lying in wait. Traditional resupply and troop transportation operations have also become almost impossible, again because these operations can't escape the seeming omnipresence of Ukraine's drones. So infantry tactics have had to change, and Russia's assaults have suffered. Speaking to Al Jazeera, the crisis group's senior Russia analyst Oleg Ignatov highlights that Russia is attacking with far smaller units thanks to Ukraine's drones. Russia has almost stopped using heavy equipment on the battlefield because it's highly vulnerable to drones. The last time Russia used heavy equipment on a large scale was during the Kursk operation in winter, Ignatov told Al Jazeera on August 26th. Russia has not attacked with large groups of soldiers for a long time. Russia uses small groups, sometimes 1 or 2 people, to gradually infiltrate Ukrainian army positions under the cover of drones and artillery. This reduces casualties. Politico makes the same point, stating that assault and infantry units on both sides have eschewed traditional mechanized advances and are now operating in groups of no more than 10 people. This is all thanks to Ukraine's brilliant drone strategies, and it's become a major problem for Russia. Remember that we mentioned that Russia has far more tanks and artillery units than Ukraine. You can add armored vehicles to that list. If this war were going the way that Russia wanted it to go, it would be deploying all of these heavy units in full-blown assaults against Ukraine's positions. Ukraine's forces would be fortified in defined locations, allowing Russia to simply bombard until its superior numbers won the day. That can't happen now. Drones roaming every inch of the battlefield make these types of large-scale assaults practically impossible, leading to much smaller sizes of assault units. Think about what this means if a Russian unit is able to break through Ukraine's defenses. Sure, that would represent a small victory, but without armored columns and masses of infantry following up, Ukraine can close the gaps these smaller units create around them. The successful Russian soldiers get eliminated, and the combat lines return to near stalemate conditions. This isn't how Putin wanted to fight the war that he started, it's how Ukraine has forced him to fight it. One of the important points to note here is that Ukraine isn't alone in using these types of drone-based strategies. Russia is doing a lot of the same things too, though it's always been playing follow the leader on the battlefield. Ukraine is now blanketed with drones on both sides, which creates logistical problems for Ukraine just as much as it does for Russia. But earlier we said that Ukraine isn't resting on its laurels with its drones. Solving these logistical problems is one example of how it continues to innovate. The ground drones Ukraine has been developing aren't solely used to conduct assaults against Russian forces. In fact, the kamikaze ground drone we spoke about earlier in the video is the exception rather than the rule when it comes to how these drones are being used. Far more often, they're used for logistical purposes, with ground drones shuttling supplies and ammunition across regions that might otherwise be too risky for a human to traverse. What we see in these instances is Ukraine's drones replacing its soldiers, which is a point we'll explore further later in the video. For now, Ukraine is going all in on its ground drones. According to the Kyiv Independent, more than 200 Ukrainian companies are now working on ground drone designs, with everything from attacking models to drones capable of carrying injured soldiers away from the battlefield coming through the pipeline. This focus on ground drones is practically a mandate at this point. The country hopes to have 15,000 of them in its stockpiles by the end of 2025, and it's signing contracts with new manufacturers all the time that suggest it's going to be shooting for much higher numbers in 2026 and beyond. These ground drones have also led to Ukraine pulling off another world first. On August 4th, the New Voice of Ukraine reported that Ukraine has created an entire ground drone battalion, which is going to become part of Ukraine's 20th Separate Regiment of Unmanned Systems. In its report, the outlet says that it was the breakdown in logistics that we mentioned earlier that sparked the boom in ground drone manufacturing that we're now seeing. One senior operator, who goes by the call sign Bintik, told the New Voice of Ukraine, "We use different drones for different jobs. Today we're sending the Rat-LH. It's a large one, more visible, but it can carry up to 600 kilograms. The load is headed to a unit we call the Vampire Squad. Since they're not right on the front line, we can use a bigger drone here." So it's not just the emergence of ground drones that should concern Russia. It's the fact that Ukraine is building many different types, all of which serve unique purposes, but ultimately allow Ukraine to replace soldiers with unmanned vehicles that can capture troops, conduct assaults, and keep supplies shuttling across the front lines. Some of these drones are even designed to pluck Russia's mines out of the ground. Mines are everywhere in Ukraine, having been laid by both sides in what is another example of the more traditional type of war that Ukraine has flipped on its head. According to the Center for European Policy Analysis, landmines affect about 40% of Ukraine's territory, which is twice the amount that Russia has managed to occupy since Putin launched his invasion. There are believed to be 2 million mines littering the Ukrainian landscape today. They will require a Herculean effort to clear, taking 127 years assuming consistent funding. Ukraine's new mine-picking drones aren't really going to speed that process up. What they can do is what so many of Ukraine's other drones do: reduce the risk presented to humans. Business Insider reported on the clever drone one Ukrainian manufacturer has come up with. Equipped with an extendable arm, the drone is capable of clearing anti-personnel mines due to those mines being less sensitive to heavy vehicles. But it's a start, and then combined with the larger remote-controlled vehicles Ukraine is using to clear up anti-tank mines, it's clear that the country's drone innovation extends to protecting itself in the future as well as fighting for its present. What we have here is example after example of how Ukraine is crushing Russia's invasion efforts by rewriting the rules of warfare. And the best part is that these new rules are far from completed. We mentioned earlier that Ukraine's drones are, in part, intended to replace as many of its human soldiers on the battlefield as possible. We've already noted the disparity in troop numbers between Russia and Ukraine. That disparity isn't going away. The Kyiv Independent says that Russia manages to mobilize between 40 and 50,000 soldiers per month, compared to the 25 to 27,000 Ukraine manages, creating a constant manpower advantage for Russia inside Ukraine. Drones are addressing the balance, and this is a concept that Ukraine should be leaning into, according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS. In an April article, CSIS said that substituting people for drones isn't just a feature of Ukraine's ultra-modern tactics today, it's essential to Ukraine's future, especially if a ceasefire is negotiated between it and Russia. To ensure that any ceasefire becomes a lasting peace, Ukraine will have to continue substituting drones for people and invest in a mix of layered air defenses and long-range conventional precision strike. CSIS makes an interesting point here, in that it's not just Ukraine's drones inside Ukraine that matter. It needs air defenses to guard against the long-range drones Russia is using, as well as long-range drones of its own to maintain a persistent threat of deep strikes against Russia should a future ceasefire be broken. Perhaps the big point here is that drones are now ingrained into the Ukrainian military philosophy, and they need to stay that way. That brings us to the latest of Ukraine's drone innovations, the Kill House Academy. On June 27th, Pravda reported that the very same 3rd Separate Assault Brigade that completed the world's first ever entirely drone-based capture of enemy forces has opened up a new academy for ground-based robot operators. Dubbed Kill House Academy, it's essentially a training center where FPV drone operators learn how to use the drones that Ukraine is using on the battlefield right now. This is about creating a pipeline, a constant source of military talent that doesn't have to learn on the job. Instead, these operators enter the battlefield understanding everything they need to know about the tools of their trade and how to use them to support their comrades and cause maximum damage to the enemy. The Academy offers a 5-day course that includes practical classes delivered by instructors who have used Ukraine's drones on the battlefield. Pravda says that there are 3 main types of missions accounted for in this course: engineering tasks, logistics and evacuation, and fire support. This academy will likely also end up being where Ukraine's drone operators get their first hands-on experience with a new generation of unmanned vehicles capable of using AI as well as following their operators' instructions. What the establishment of this academy tells us is that complacency has no place in Ukraine's military. It has already rewritten the rules of modern warfare by taking on a much larger opponent with drones, making the most of its limited resources in the process. Now Ukraine is building on the foundations of a paradigm-shifting strategy. Ground drones are arriving in greater numbers than ever before, replacing soldiers on the battlefield as they do. Ukraine is teaching its new recruits how to use drones long before those recruits reach the battlefield, ingraining unmanned vehicles into the Ukrainian military philosophy in the process. All Russia can do is attempt to play catch-up. It has to. The traditional tactics it thought would win the war in Ukraine have been crushed, and Putin simply can't afford to commit his country to a fight that will take decades to win. Ukraine's brilliant use of drones to change the landscape of war extends to its deep strikes inside Russia. And just as we've seen throughout this video, Ukraine is always evolving. Russia won't recover from this, as Ukraine's deep strike strategy upgrade just changed everything. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering how Ukraine is countering everything that Russia throws at it. Thanks for watching.